Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show, where we help you make the wisest, most profitable decisions. My name is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. I'm the CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts, the future of work consultancy that sponsors the Wise Decision Maker Show. And I'm here today with Adam Glassman. He's the Executive Director of the Jaeb Center for Health Research, and he'll tell us what he does a little bit later throughout the show. But I want to start with going through the process of how you made the decision to have a home-centric company. So let's talk a little bit about that. I know you and I talked about these things earlier, where you faced some pushback from fellow Vistage members in your peer executive group, where they were saying, oh, you should not do that. And they were important influencers in your life as fellow peer executives in your group. Tell me a little bit about the context of the decision.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. So, like many companies, in March of 2020, we sent our at the time about 120 staff members home to work remotely while the pandemic was in full swing. And then that gave us an opportunity to learn how people can work remotely, and then think more broadly about what our future could be, and whether once things settled down, whether we did want to bring everybody back to the office, or whether we wanted to consider a hybrid option, people coming into the office a few days a week, people not, people working from home a few days a week, or whether we wanted to go to this home-centric model where most of the staff would be working from home pretty much exclusively. And like all major decisions, there was obviously I got a lot of input from Vistage members, other CEO leadership, from yourself, from our board of directors, and quite frankly from the staff. So as most leaders will do when they have tough decisions to make, thinking about all the different pros and cons, and we can certainly go into some of those. But for me, one of the driving forces for me was the staff. And one of the things that we did early on was poll them and asked all 120 staff what their view has been. And our staff is pretty broad in terms of demographics, and so I think it gave us a nice opportunity to really get a sense of what their experience had been through the first year working from home, and what they conceptualized the future could be. And so it was we gave them options. Do you think everybody should come back in the office? Do you think we should go to a hybrid? Do you like the home-centric model? And over 90% of the staff, again, about 120 at the time, over 90% of the staff thought that the home-centric model was not only best for them as an individual, but also best for Jaeb, the Jaeb Center for Health Research as a company. And obviously, as a leader, there are a lot of things to consider, financial, as well as many others, when making these decisions. But I do think that employee empowerment is really important. And I do think that listening to your team members is really important, because ultimately that's going to lead to retention. That's going to lead to happier team members. And so although there were many aspects that went into ultimately making the decision, the survey of the staff was very, very insightful in terms of what our long-term plans were.
That certainly makes sense. And I know when you and I met to talk about this, to do some consulting on this topic, that was something you brought up. But at the same time, from fellow peer executives, you had a lot of pushback. And so from some board members, I know you told me you had some pushback. So tell me a little bit about how you weighed these different criteria and how you were thinking about this topic. What was your decision-making process like?
Yeah, so the pushback certainly came from a lot of different sources, and certainly had a lot of really good insight. And some of it was, I think, just a lack of experience with home-centric approach, and the uncertainty about how you can develop new staff, the uncertainty about how you can maintain culture. One of the driving forces at the Jaeb Center for many, many years, Jaeb Center has been around for nearly 30 years, has been the culture of the organization. And so maintaining that culture to this day certainly is one of my, I think, most important aspects of the job as leader. And so the idea that if you're not together physically, that your culture will, forever be changed for the worse, I think was a concern. And so, as a leader, you have to think, I had to think, okay, well, that is a legitimate concern. How can we, if we go to this home-centric model, how can we get around that? And so you have to be creative, you have to be purposeful with a lot of these, different decisions and approaches that you're making. And, as you stack up, okay, these are the concerns, whether it was the Vistage members or whether it's, other CEOs or the board, how can we overcome some of these challenges? My company, we are a little bit more autonomous than collaborative. And so I do think that, if we were a company where collaboration was happening, 90% of the time, there are still a lot of now much more useful tools where you could accomplish that, but it might be even a harder sell for us. So some, some individuals may have been coming from, that perspective also, because, again, a lot of this was new, it still is. And so, the idea that you could collaborate effectively and efficiently through these types of mediums, I think was unique, is still unique. And so we're still learning a lot of that. So, ultimately it was understanding their perspective and thinking about, okay, these are good points. How can we get around them? And if we can figure out, at least conceptually, how we could try to overcome some of these challenges, then we could more holistically say, yes, this is good for the staff. We've already found that out. And it's good for the company because of X, Y, and Z. We can put these things in place that can try to overcome, some of the concerns with culture, some of the concerns with growth and development, that sort of thing.
And I know when we met, I was telling you about some of the research that showed that overall, people who work remotely tend to be individually, so autonomously, much more productive than people who work in the office on average, something like 9 to 10%. Collaboratively tends to be more of a wash. It depends on the person, the nature of the collaboration. And also, you'll have much higher retention for people who have the flexibility to work from home. But the connection between people does suffer. So the point about collaboration, if you have a company that's much more relies on collaboration, there's definitely benefit to having occasional required in the office days, maybe 1 day a week or something like that. But so let's think about the various criteria you're thinking about. I know one of the big things you and I talked about was retention. How large did that weigh for you when you were thinking about the future of the Jaeb Center?
So it was enormous. And it's not just retention of the current staff, which is certainly huge, but it's the ability to recruit and recruit nationally. And so before the pandemic, less than 5% of our company was remote. And they were individuals who started with us locally, and their spouse, maybe found a position somewhere else, and they're, great team member, and we wanted to keep them. And so they moved away and still work remotely. And, even though Teams was not what it is now, we would have them as part of those calls. And so when you had 15 people around a conference room table and one person on the phone, for me, that was never a good scenario. The one person on the phone was always, excluded. They were never really engaged as much. You couldn't have the same types of conversations that you could if everybody was in the same venue. Now, again, that no longer, I think, has to be in person. It can be virtual, but it all has to be the same. And so the decision, or the discussion was, if we want to be able to recruit nationally, which we do, and if I really don't like the idea of having this sort of, 80% of the group in the office and 20% of the group at home, because this dynamic where you have one or two people virtually and everyone else around a table, because I think that dynamic is extremely negative, then the idea of bringing people in 1 or 2 days a week still only brings in a small percentage or a percentage of the staff if you've decided that you're going to recruit nationally. We started before the pandemic with about 5% of the staff that were remote, not in the area Tampa Bay area, which is where our home base is. And now we're a third of the company are not local to Tampa. So, again, just the ability to recruit nationally and now have, been able to about a third of the company looking all over the country and have that, have that ability has been hugely helpful. So I think ultimately that's why the real decision for me was never should we go back 5 days a week. The reality is that that was not really on the table for me. The very tough decision was hybrid versus home-centric. And, to your point, a lot of companies have decided we're going to go back hybrid because we want that interaction, because, we need that community. But I still feel that the exclusionary aspect of that, if you're going to recruit nationally, is very significant. And that's why ultimately one of the reasons why the home-centric model really did win out.
Yeah, and as we talked about, your team don't really collaborate together nearly as much as folks on other teams. So about 90%, I think, of the work that the employees at the Jaeb Center do is individual, and 10% is collaborative. So that's the productivity quotient is very clear that the productivity is much higher at home. So what did you find about productivity? How did the people moving to remote work impact productivity with this home-centric model?
So, interestingly, this is still an area that we struggle with a little bit, and have always, though, whether it was at home or in the office, is measuring productivity. Our jobs are not as easy to measure as if you were selling something, or if you were producing something, where you had to do you had to make 10 of these things by a certain day, or make 100 phone calls. And so measuring productivity at the Jaeb Center has always been a challenge, and something, even if we were in the office, I think we would be spending some time trying to do better at evaluating. So that is an area that we are still working on. So without extremely concrete measures, it becomes very important for the team leaders to really have close connections with their staff, because that allows, even if we're not measuring it in a quantitative way, it does allow the team leaders to qualitatively assess, okay, how are these employees doing? And I think that they can do that really in the same way that we were doing it before, not necessarily with KPIs, with key performance indicators, but in more of a qualitative state. And as a company, we are working towards trying to identify better ways to quantify that as well. So that's definitely a task that we still need to work on.
And what about morale? How do you find that morale and engagement? How do you find the home-centric model impacted morale and engagement for the staff?
So maybe a three-part answer here. So I think that work-life balance, which is certainly a pretty important buzzword these days, is really critical. And I think that staff and team members that have the ability to remove their commute, to work in an area, in a situation that they're comfortable with, to not have to do as much prep for their lunch or themselves, whatever, in order to get to the office, has enormous advantages. And so I think from a personal aspect, morale has increased from that level. You're not sitting, I mean, everybody deals with this, you're not sitting an hour for your commute and getting to the office and you're already aggravated and whatever. So there's certainly morale aspects from that. As a company, we've tried to do things. We are a nonprofit, and so a lot of people do work at the Jaeb Center to focus on our mission. And so one of the things we really have tried to do is offer up a lot of educational opportunities, whether they are educational opportunities that are led by outside organizations, but more specifically educational opportunities within the Jaeb Center. And so whether it's sharing some of the results of our clinical trials, or whether it's just educating people on different aspects of the functions that we do, I think that has really brought people closer together, brought people continue to be engaged with our mission, understand, what it is that we're doing, why it is that we're doing it, and can be excited about, the results of our, of what our mission is trying to accomplish. So I think that, that engagement and focus on the mission, focus on what it is that we're doing, has been extremely helpful in terms of, keeping morale. In terms of measuring it, again, that is more of a challenge. And I think that's where, you really do need to have strong team leaders that have their finger on the pulse of their groups, that can, present to me or whoever, more executive leadership when there are issues. I will say that, when I think about what it was before, if you will, one of the things that is more challenging is, certainly as executive leadership, to walk around, to feel some of the excitement, to even just bump into somebody in the halls. We're 150 staff members now, so I don't have an opportunity to interact with many of the staff members on a routine basis. But when we were in person and you could just bump into in the halls and ask them how they were doing, it was, it could happen a lot more organically. And so you could get a better sense as executive leadership, I think, about what the morale situation was. I think that is harder now. And I think that's where you do need to rely on the support of your team leaders in order to do that.
What about surveys? So you ran that survey that you told me about earlier. Have you run surveys to measure morale and to measure productivity? And those might be useful as baselines and then see how they change over time.
That's an excellent point, and we have not done that. We are currently evaluating sort of an end of the year, self-assessment type situation, where I think we will ask some of those questions. I wish we would have thought about that maybe a year ago so we could have better metrics over time. I think that is a great idea, but it's not too late to start. And so, I think our ability to look at that and to measure it and to react to it, I think it's not just a matter of collecting, it's a matter of, okay, what are you going to do about it? Obviously, if morale is high, you want to understand what it is that you've done to get it there so you can keep it. And if morale is low, you want to understand, why and what you can do to turn that around. So having those metrics and then, determining how you can react to it, I think is an excellent point.
Excellent. Now, let me circle back to culture. So you try to, of course, maintain culture, and that's obviously somewhat of a challenge in a more remote setting. What have you done to work on maintaining and cultivating the culture at the Jaeb Center?
So, as I mentioned before, I think culture has a lot to do with what our mission is, why people work at the Jaeb Center, and the learning opportunities, the educational growth, and certainly, the opportunities to grow professionally as well. And so I think that really focusing on those educational opportunities and learning and being engaged in the mission is one of the ways that we continue to cultivate culture. I think that we've also always been a company that despite our size, I think has been very sort of close-knit company. And so I think the ability again for our groups, our teams, whatever it is, departments, to meet and to do icebreakers, to meet and to, for those that are local, to meet and to go axe throwing. We're having a chili cook-off in a couple of weeks. I think that these are things that, you need to do purposefully, and some of it costs money. The company will pay for axe throwing. I'm just using that as an example. And I think, but to maintain that sort of close-knit group, despite not seeing each other every day, I think helps and is really important in terms of maintaining that culture. And we still have a lot to learn there as well in terms of what water. How can you and I think you've mentioned some of these things in your prior podcasts, but how can you sort of mimic the water cooler? How can you mimic the water cooler, talk that used to happen more organically and doesn't now? And so you have to be a little bit more purposeful about it. And those are still some areas that we're working to improve on.
And definitely, there are ways to use Microsoft Teams to cultivate culture on a daily, everyday basis, because There's so many people who think that, well, culture comes from in-person interactions. That's not where culture comes from. Culture comes from the daily interactions that you have with people. And that can come from text exchanges, email exchanges, Microsoft Teams messages, Microsoft Teams meetings, all sorts of interactions. That's where your culture comes from. It's the norms and behaviors and relationships that make your company who you are, right?
Absolutely. Totally agree. And that's why I do think that, when I talk to other leaders, culture is the thing that they point to as their biggest concern in going with either a hybrid or a home-centric approach. And so certainly that is the area where we need to continue to foster. And there's in my opinion, there's almost no way that it can be exactly what it was before, right? I mean, we can talk about the impact, positive or negative, et cetera, but it is different, and different is okay. But you need to make sure as leaders that different doesn't become worse, that you're still using these tools and using the importance of culture building and maybe being a little bit more purposeful with certain things in order to maintain what you had before.
Absolutely. And I think it's very important that you're saying that it's not worse. I mean, thinking about all of these things, people are overall more productive. They have better morale, higher engagement. You can recruit nationally, so you have a better, more diverse workforce. And that's great. So what you want to do is, of course, have culture it's not going to be worse than before if you know how to do it correctly and if you use native virtual formats to actually cultivate a healthy culture. So it sounds like what you're really focusing on right now, cultivating that culture, focusing on morale and trying to measure that.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Are there any last words that you would like to share? Anything that folks should know about your experience with the home-centric model?
I think, the one thing that we haven't really touched on is just, quite frankly, the ability to get people home and how that looks like, and the toll that it takes on your IT department and the toll that it takes on your pocket, if you will, your budget, because sure. We are a healthcare company, if you will. We'll talk about that in a minute. And so we have a lot of very sensitive information and data that comes to us, and so we need to make sure that people at home are just as protected with virtually as they were in the office. And so when you do that, when you let 150 staff members work remotely, there are certain risks that can come up if you're not, if you don't have a very strong IT department and you don't have a very strong, cybersecurity approach. So, I mean, that's one of the areas that we haven't necessarily talked about here. And it's certainly not a reason not to go virtual or not to go home-centric. But it is, an area that we needed to have a really strong support team in order to make sure that we are confident in what we're doing in that space.
Excellent. Thank you for pointing that out. And as we finish up, tell folks a little bit more about the company and exactly what it does. And of course, it's a health research company, but tell us what you exactly do.
Sure. So Jaeb Center for Health Research is a nonprofit. We've been around for nearly 30 years, and basically we're a clinical trials coordinating center. And so what that means is that we work with doctors' offices all over the country, all over the world in many cases, to plan, to implement, to conduct clinical research, clinical trials in particular. And so we will develop studies. We will monitor studies. We will create analyses from the results of studies while the doctors see the patients and provide that information to us, and then ultimately report the results in medical journals in collaboration with scientists and clinicians all over the country. And so we help coordinate that. A lot of our funding comes from the National Institutes of Health, for example. A lot of our funding comes from other nonprofits that have focus on medical research as well.
Yes, of course, with HIPAA and so on, it's especially important for you to protect people's security at home. And tell folks what you do in terms of helping the staff secure their home offices, as well as what kind of home office technology, equipment, furniture, so what kind of support do you provide financially?
Yeah, excellent question. So we have provided all of our staff with all of the IT equipment that they need. Everyone has 2 monitors, they've got a laptop, they've got, mouse, keyboard, docking station, whatever they need. And so that has all been provided because for me, one of the keys is I didn't want to just send people home and have them fend for themselves. I want them to be able to have the tools that they had in the office, because I think that, as you talk about productivity, if they don't have the tools, at least the tools that they had in the office, then you can't expect them to be as productive. So we made sure that everyone had those resources available. It also allows us to implement the right types of security software on individual laptops, because they are ours. They are owned by the Jaeb Center, and so we can control that in a much more efficient way. So in addition to that, we do have someone on our IT operations group that focuses on cybersecurity, and so even yesterday, actually, he gave a talk to the company just about, I think this is Cybersecurity Month, so he gave a talk about different ways that you can protect not only your passwords and things like that, but also your physical equipment.
Excellent.
So those are the kinds of things that we do to try to educate our teams on what some of the challenges are.
Yeah, and when we met first, I definitely recall us talking about the equipment and talking about how valuable it is to provide that equipment. And that's very important to do to help staff be as productive as possible, right?
That's the name of the game, right?
Can you tell folks where they can learn more about the Jaeb Center? What website would you direct them to?
So our website is www.jaeb.org.
Excellent. All right. Thank you very much for that conversation. And thank you very much to the audience for checking out another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. Make sure to subscribe to it wherever you're checking it out, whether it's on YouTube, on iTunes, and leave a review as a comment on YouTube, as a review on iTunes. We always love to know how we can make the show better with your feedback. And make sure to subscribe to the show so you keep getting it. And I hope to see you on the next episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. In the meantime, the wisest and most profitable decisions to you, my friends.